The sound of heavy machinery woke me from a dead sleep. My bed was vibrating from the rumble of what had to be bulldozers or excavators. I glanced at the clock, 6:43 a.m. on a Saturday. What the hell? Before you watch the story, please comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I threw on jeans and a t-shirt and rushed outside, still barefoot. What I saw made my heart nearly stop. A full construction crew with 3 bulldozers, 2 excavators, and several dump trucks had invaded my 5-acre property. Workers in yellow vests were spray painting lines across my land while others were already tearing up my carefully maintained grounds. Hey, stop. What are you doing? I shouted, running toward the nearest bulldozer that was pushing down part of my fence line. The operator either couldn't hear me over the engine or was deliberately ignoring me. I moved closer, waving my arms frantically until he finally cut the engine. What the hell do you think you're doing on my property? I demanded as the machine fell silent. The operator looked confused. This is the site for the new Pinecrest Community Access Road, he said, pointing to a map attached to his dashboard. We're on schedule, got all the permits. This is private property, I said, my voice rising with each word. I never approved any access road. A man in a white hard hat and clipboard walked over, looking annoyed at the delay. What's the problem here? The problem is you're trespassing and destroying my property, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my rage. Who authorized this? Pinecrest Homeowners Association, he replied matter-of-factly. All the paperwork's been approved. We're building the north access road to the new development. I don't belong to any HOA, I said. My property isn't part of Pinecrest or any other development. You need to get your equipment off my land immediately. The foreman gave me a dismissive look. Look, buddy, take it up with the HOA. We have our orders and permits. He started to walk away, waving for the bulldozer operator to continue. I stepped directly in front of the machine. You move this bulldozer 1 more inch and I'm calling the police for criminal trespassing and destruction of property. The foreman turned back, his face hardening. Don't make this difficult. He was interrupted by the arrival of a luxury SUV that pulled up at the edge of my property. A woman emerged wearing designer clothes that were comically out of place amid the construction chaos. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she carried an iPad in a leather case. Is there a problem with the project? She asked the foreman, barely acknowledging my existence. This guy says we're on his property, the foreman explained. She finally turned to me with a practiced, condescending smile. I'm Elizabeth Morgan, president of the Pinecrest Homeowners Association. And you are? Robert Caldwell, the owner of this property that your crew is currently destroying. Elizabeth glanced around as if seeing the property for the first time. Mr. Caldwell, I understand your confusion, but I assure you everything is in order. The northern access corridor was approved last month, and all affected property owners were notified. I was never notified of anything, I said firmly. And I'm not part of your HOA. Never have been. Elizabeth tapped on her iPad and turned it toward me. According to our records, this parcel was incorporated into the Pinecrest Development Zone as of January. The previous notification would have been sent to. She paused, looking at her screen, this address. I've lived here for 12 years, I said. There was no notification because this land is not part of your development. Never has been. She sighed like she was dealing with a stubborn child. Mr. Caldwell, I understand this is inconvenient, but the community access road is essential for our new phase of development. The plans have been approved by the county. Show me these approvals, I demanded. She pulled up another document on her iPad, showing me a permit with the county seal. I scanned it quickly, immediately noticing that the lot number didn't match my property. This is for lot 247 of Pinecrest Estates, I pointed out. My property isn't part of your development. It's never had a lot number because it's not in a subdivision. Elizabeth's smile tightened. There seems to be some confusion about the property boundaries. But I assure you, our legal team has verified everything. What Elizabeth Morgan didn't know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her professional life. She had chosen the wrong property to trespass on, and the wrong person to bully. Let me be very clear, I said calmly. I'm a retired judge who specialized in property law for 20 years before taking the bench. I know exactly where my property boundaries are, and I know you're trespassing. Her smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. With all due respect, Mr. Caldwell, Pinecrest Development has significant resources and excellent relationships with county officials. Perhaps we should discuss reasonable compensation rather than opposition. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the sheriff to report criminal trespassing. Then I'm calling my friends. Your friends? She looked amused. Yes. Specifically, my friends who still practice law. You see, when you're a judge for 30 years, you make a lot of friends in the legal profession. Many of whom would be delighted to take on a case of HOA overreach and illegal property seizure. For the first time, Elizabeth looked uncertain. While waiting for the sheriff, I made several calls. First to David Chin, who had been one of the top property rights attorneys in the state before his recent retirement. Then to Maria Gonzalez, who specialized in HOA litigation and had argued cases before the state Supreme Court. Finally, to James Williams, an environmental lawyer who had successfully fought developers for decades. These weren't just colleagues. They were friends who had appeared in my courtroom countless times over the years. Friends who respected me, and who shared my disgust for the kind of tactics Elizabeth Morgan was employing. The sheriff's deputy arrived first, Deputy Anderson, whom I recognized from community events. Judge Caldwell. He greeted me with respect. What's going on here? Before I could answer, Elizabeth stepped forward. Officer, we have all the necessary permits for this construction project. There's simply a misunderstanding about property boundaries. Deputy Anderson looked at me questioningly. This is my private property, I explained. I've owned it for 12 years. It's not part of any HOA or development. They've trespassed with heavy machinery and have already caused significant damage. Elizabeth tried to show the deputy her iPad with the permits, but I interrupted. Those permits are for a different property, I said firmly. Lot 247 of Pinecrest Estates. My property is registered with the county as the Caldwell Homestead Rural Route 5. The deputy looked uncomfortable, clearly torn between respecting my position as a former judge and not wanting to interfere with what might be a legitimate construction project. Ma'am, if there's a property dispute, he began. There is no dispute, Elizabeth interrupted. We have the permits and approvals. Deputy Anderson, I said calmly, I understand you're in a difficult position. But I'd like to report criminal trespassing and destruction of property. I'm not asking you to resolve the property dispute. That will be handled through proper legal channels. I'm simply asking you to document the trespassing and damage for the record. The deputy nodded, relieved to have a clear action to take. I can do that, Judge. Elizabeth's face darkened. This is ridiculous. Do you know how much this delay is costing? Pinecrest Development is the largest taxpayer in this county. That doesn't give you the right to take someone's land, I replied. Just then, 3 cars pulled into my driveway in quick succession. David, Maria, and James had arrived, and they looked ready for battle. Each carried briefcases and had expressions that any courtroom opponent would recognize as dangerous. Robert, David greeted me with a handshake. Quite a situation you have here. Elizabeth eyed the newcomers suspiciously. And who might you be? Maria stepped forward, extending her business card. Maria Gonzalez, attorney at law. I specialize in HOA litigation and constitutional property rights. James and David also offered their cards, creating a formidable wall of legal expertise facing Elizabeth. Judge Caldwell asked us to review this situation. David explained, his tone as calm and measured as it had been when he argued before me in court. From what I can see, this appears to be a clear case of trespassing, attempted illegal seizure of private property, and significant property damage. Elizabeth's confidence was visibly shaken, but she attempted to maintain her authority. Our legal team has verified. Your legal team made a grave error, Maria interrupted. I've already pulled up the county property records on my phone. This land is registered to Robert Caldwell and has never been part of the Pinecrest development. James added, moreover, the environmental impact study required for any road construction of this scale was never completed for this property. That's a violation of state environmental protection laws. Elizabeth's face had lost its color. There must be some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I said firmly, is your belief that you could take my land without consequences. Deputy Anderson had been listening to the exchange with growing certainty. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask the construction crew to vacate Judge Caldwell's property immediately. This is clearly a case of trespassing. You can't be serious, Elizabeth protested. Do you know how much money is at stake here? The development will be delayed by months if we can't build this access road. That's not the judge's problem, David said calmly. Perhaps you should have secured legal access before committing to your development timeline. The deputy was now recording the scene with his body camera, documenting the destruction already caused by the construction equipment. The foreman, sensing which way the wind was blowing, had already ordered his crew to stop work. Elizabeth retreated to her SUV, furiously making phone calls. I could imagine she was trying to reach whoever she knew at the county offices, desperately seeking to override what was happening. But it was Saturday, and even if she had connections, they wouldn't be able to help her immediately. Meanwhile, my legal team was building our case. Maria photographed every piece of equipment and every bit of damage. David reviewed the permits Elizabeth had shown me, confirming they were for a completely different property. James was assessing the environmental damage to prepare for additional claims. After about 30 minutes, Elizabeth emerged from her vehicle, her expression a mix of frustration and forced composure. Mr. Caldwell, in light of this confusion, Pinecrest Development is willing to discuss compensation for the inconvenience and any damage caused. This isn't about compensation, I replied. This is about your deliberate attempt to take my land. That's a serious accusation, she said, her voice hardening. Maria stepped forward. One we can substantiate. The permit you're using clearly lists a different property. Either your HOA deliberately used the wrong documentation to seize land you have no right to, or you're criminally incompetent in your duties. We'll be filing for an emergency injunction on Monday, David added, along with civil claims for trespassing, property damage, and attempted property theft. And environmental violations, James chimed in. The creek that runs through this property is protected habitat. The damage already done carries significant penalties. For the first time, Elizabeth looked genuinely worried. I'm sure we can resolve this without resorting to litigation. Too late for that, I said firmly. Your crew needs to remove their equipment from my property immediately. Any further delay will only add to the damages we'll be seeking. With the deputy's insistence, the construction crew began the process of removing their machinery from my land. Elizabeth made one last attempt to salvage the situation. Judge Caldwell, please consider the community benefits of this access road. We could compensate you generously for an easement. Ms. Morgan, I replied, the time to negotiate an easement was before you sent bulldozers onto my property. Now we'll let the courts decide appropriate remedies. As the last construction vehicle left my property, Elizabeth approached me one final time, her voice low so others couldn't hear. You have no idea who you're dealing with, she said. Pinecrest Development has connections throughout this county. This won't end well for you. I smiled calmly. Ms. Morgan, I served on the bench in this county for 30 years. I know exactly who has connections and who doesn't. And threatening a former judge in front of witnesses is another mistake to add to your growing list. She stalked away, slamming her car door before speeding off in a cloud of dust. The initial confrontation was over, but I knew this was just the beginning of a larger battle. The Pinecrest HOA and Development Company wouldn't give up easily on their plans, especially if the northern access road was crucial to their expansion. Over the next few days, with help from my legal team, we pieced together what had happened. The Pinecrest Development had been expanding aggressively for the past 3 years, buying up neighboring properties whenever possible. My land was a critical piece they needed for their newest phase, a luxury section with million-dollar homes that required a second access road to meet county requirements. They had apparently tried to contact me about purchasing the property 6 months earlier, sending letters offering to buy my land at well below market value. Those letters had gone directly to my spam folder because they came from a generic development company email rather than a personal contact. When I didn't respond to their lowball offers, they decided on a more aggressive approach. What we discovered was shocking. They had actually fabricated documents claiming my property was part of their development, counting on their connections with county officials to push the permits through without proper verification. What they hadn't counted on was choosing the property of a retired judge with extensive knowledge of property law and powerful friends in the legal community. On Monday morning, we filed for an emergency injunction to prevent any further attempts to access my property. We also filed civil suits against both the Pinecrest HOA and Pinecrest Development Corporation for trespassing, property damage, fraud, and attempted theft of land. The county commissioner's office, suddenly facing scrutiny over how the fraudulent permits had been approved, launched their own investigation. The official who had signed off on the permits without proper verification was placed on administrative leave. Elizabeth Morgan tried one more tactic, sending a community liaison to inform my neighbors that my obstruction would prevent road improvements that would benefit everyone. She hoped to turn local opinion against me. It backfired spectacularly when Maria Gonzalez sent cease and desist letters threatening defamation suits if the false statements continued. 3 weeks later, we had our day in court for the emergency injunction. Judge Ramirez, who had taken over my position when I retired, listened carefully to both sides. Elizabeth had hired an expensive legal team from the city, but they were fighting an uphill battle against clear evidence. Your Honor, their attorney argued, this is simply a misunderstanding about property boundaries. Pinecrest Development acted in good faith based on the permits issued by the county. Maria countered, the permits clearly reference a different property altogether. This wasn't a boundary dispute, it was an attempt to seize land they had no right to, after Judge Caldwell refused to sell. Judge Ramirez didn't take long to make her decision. The court grants the emergency injunction. Pinecrest Development and Pinecrest HOA are prohibited from entering Judge Caldwell's property for any reason. Furthermore, given the evidence of fraudulent documentation, the court orders an independent survey to officially document the property boundaries, at the defendant's expense. It was a significant victory, but only the beginning. The civil case would take months to resolve, and I knew the developers wouldn't give up easily. What I didn't expect was how quickly the community would rally around me. When the local newspaper ran a story about the attempted land grab, other property owners came forward with similar stories about Pinecrest's aggressive tactics. Some had sold under pressure, not realizing they could fight back. Others had been fighting lone battles against HOA overreach for years. Maria suggested we form a property owners alliance to share resources and information. Within weeks, 20 local homeowners had joined, many bringing their own stories of encounters with the Pinecrest HOA. The county investigation revealed a troubling pattern of preferential treatment for Pinecrest development projects. The commissioner who had approved the fraudulent permits had received substantial campaign contributions from entities connected to the development company. This discovery led to a broader ethics investigation and eventually to his resignation. 4 months after the bulldozers first arrived on my property, we received an unexpected communication. Pinecrest Development had replaced their CEO and was under new management. The new leadership requested a meeting to discuss settlement options for all pending litigation. In a conference room at David's law office, we met with the new CEO and their legal team. The change in approach was immediately apparent. Judge Caldwell, the new CEO began, on behalf of Pinecrest Development, I want to offer a sincere apology for the inexcusable actions taken regarding your property. What happened was wrong and we're committed to making it right. Their settlement offer exceeded even my expectations. Full restoration of my property, significant monetary damages, a written public apology, and most importantly, binding agreements that Pinecrest would never attempt to acquire my land again without my explicit consent. Additionally, the CEO added, we've completely restructured our approach to development. We've terminated our relationship with the Pinecrest HOA management company and are implementing new ethical guidelines for all our projects. After consulting with my legal team, I accepted the settlement with one additional condition: that Pinecrest contribute to a new legal fund we were establishing to help property owners fight against HOA overreach and illegal development practices. As for Elizabeth Morgan, she was removed as HOA president and later faced her own legal troubles when financial irregularities were discovered in the HOA accounts. The construction foreman who had initially dismissed my protests reached out to apologize, explaining that they had been assured all paperwork was in order. 1 year after the confrontation, my property had been restored. The damaged areas had been professionally landscaped, and the fence replaced with a sturdier version. The creek that James had identified as protected habitat was now officially designated as a conservation area, safe from future development. The Property Rights Legal Defense Fund, established with part of my settlement money, had already helped 3 families successfully challenge improper HOA actions. Maria had taken over as its director, with David and James serving as advisors. Looking back, I realized that the Pinecrest HOA and developers had made a series of critical mistakes. They had chosen to trespass on land belonging to someone with the knowledge and resources to fight back. They had assumed their connections would protect them from consequences. And most fatally, they had never bothered to research whose property they were invading. They never expected that the quiet homeowner they were trying to bully would be a retired judge with decades of experience in property law. They never anticipated that one phone call could summon a team of highly skilled attorneys ready to fight for justice. And they certainly never imagined that their illegal land grab would spark a county-wide reckoning with corrupt development practices. As I sat on my porch, watching the sunset over my peaceful property, I thought about how differently things might have gone if I hadn't had the knowledge and connections to defend myself. How many others had lost their land because they couldn't fight back against powerful developers and aggressive HOAs? That thought reinforced my commitment to the Legal Defense Fund. No homeowner should have to face such battles alone. Sometimes, justice needs friends with law degrees, unwavering principles, and the determination to stand up against those who believe their money and influence put them above the law. The Pinecrest HOA had trespassed on the wrong property, and in doing so, they had unwittingly sparked a movement that would change the balance of power between developers and property owners throughout the county. All because they didn't bother to check who they were dealing with before sending bulldozers onto my land. Sometimes, the most powerful lesson is also the simplest. Before you try to take something that isn't yours, make sure the owner doesn't have friends who know the law better than you do.